Welcome back to the Pushing Through Loss podcast, where we share stories, honor resilience, and embrace strength. I am Kalila Green Siciliano, and it is my honor to begin the journey with you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Debbie and I just met, and I'm honored to have you on. I think any sort of loss is so vital to talk about because, as we were just saying before we started recording, that the more you feel like you can connect with people who've been through something in the similar way that you have, the more you feel that you're not alone. And so I really want to thank you and just honor the fact that you're here sharing your story.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your very important show as a guest.
Thank you. So let's start at the beginning because I know I looked at your website, so I have a little bit of a background as to where you're coming at loss from. But why don't I just hand it over to you and start where you feel is appropriate?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I am a single mom of three now in their two now in their 20s. One is passed on. But really kind of my story starts when my oldest one was 17 and he first came to me and told me that he wanted to kill himself and
Wow.
described exactly how he would do it and even admitted that he had attempted it. And at the time as a mom, that was like at that point the hardest thing that I had ever heard. And that point on, our lives were forever changed in those years. He was hospitalized and he was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which is pretty serious. It kind of has things in common with schizophrenia and with bipolar. So he had a lot of problems with, suicidal over the years, depression, hallucinations, paranoia, on and off medications, and then began using drugs and alcohol. And that also was a very difficult time for us. As a mom, it can be, just really scary, not knowing where your child is, not knowing if they're safe, not knowing what they're using. And
And all
it was,
because he's just trying to make himself feel better.
yeah, I really think that's what he was doing. The medications are just really hard because if you can, I remember the doctors had even warned us, and we found this to be true, but if you can find medications that help the symptoms of his illness, there were side effects involved, and he would likely, be on and off of them. And that was so true. And I think the medicines made him not feel like himself, and they didn't really help the depression piece as much. I think they definitely curbed the paranoid thinking and the hallucinations, so that was good. But I still think he suffered, and life was truly very difficult for him. And there were times that I almost lost him in his late teens, early 20s, several times to drug overdoses. And, there were times I was told that they didn't know if he would make it. They didn't know if they would be able to save him. And it was a difficult 9 years. And,
I mean,
we
it's a
were
roller coaster, it sounds like.
It was, yeah, that's the thing. And I had to learn to not jump on that roller coaster, because the early years were really filled with a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of worry, a lot of fear, um, a lot of not truly living my own life. Like my life was his life. Like how he was doing moment to moment, day to day, what was going on, that was how I was doing. And I didn't even realize it until a few years in. And then once I fully became aware what I was doing, that I wasn't even living my life, I was able to make changes. I was able to really apply things that I had learned as a coach, learned as just a fan of, like, a lot of people out there in growth. Like I attend a lot of Tony Robbins events, and I just started applying the things that I learned from other people. Like, how can I help myself? How can I? And it ended up being really good because I was able to really find peace and have a really close relationship with him. And I think that it also modeled for my other two kids
Hmm.
as they were growing up, so that they could kind of set boundaries for themselves so that they could still have a life but still support Alex.
Hmm.
Alex was my oldest son. And so we could still support him, we could still love him, we could still spend time with him, we could still be compassionate and understanding no matter where he was in his
Hmm.
journey, whether that day or that week or that month he was sober and on his medicines, or whether he wasn't, because
Wow.
most of the time he really wasn't. And so we were able to be able to handle those situations and still have a close relationship. And I'm so glad that I was able to do that. And I think they are too. Um,
Do you think that
and
it brought the three of you closer also?
yeah, we have I think we had been very close
Hmm.
because their dad was not in the picture since a very young age. And so I remember like my daughter saying to me on Father's Day, she'd say Happy Father's Day and Mother's Day, Happy Mother's Day. Like I was,
Oh,
so I think that made us all so close.
great.
Um, but I think being able to have that extra component when Alex got ill, to be able to have us have compassion and understanding for him, and not have to only wait for certain criteria, like he's sober, he's stable, he's this, he's that. Like it didn't matter. I mean, of course it mattered, we care.
Right.
But as
But
far
you
as
didn't
like,
base your relationship on it.
right, as far as just that unconditional love, like I'm pretty sure he felt our unconditional love and non-judgment and our compassion for him. Um and I'm so glad, because as I'll get into, like when you lose somebody, you realize that that time with them was so precious. And
Yeah.
so I am, there was not one piece of me that said, like, oh, I should have kept worrying because that would prepare me for losing him. No,
Right.
no, no. I am so glad that I enjoyed my son and had a close relationship with him so that I had the memories to cherish.
I have no words. I mean, it's the way that you look at it is so beautiful to be able to say that you can so cherish the time that you spend, even though you obviously have done a lot of work to recover from grief.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, yeah, the news of losing him, um, and that was he was 26 years old, and so by that time he had had about 9 years since his diagnosis, and we had just spent a really great New Year's Day together. All of my three kids and my other two kids' partners and myself, they came out to the country to visit me. We had a lovely day, and we think it was probably the first time in years we had seen Alex completely sober and happier. And that was just so nice to see, because it just added, like we always, loved seeing him, but this just made it really nice.
Mhm.
And, we all hugged and said goodbye and exchanged our love yous, and not knowing that that was going to be the last time that we would ever see him.
Wow.
And it was the middle of winter, and there was a snow, there was then 2 days later there was a big snowstorm, and I ended up getting sick. My daughter and other son ended up getting sick. Alex wasn't, though, and I had talked to him on the phone. He was looking for a room to rent, and he said he was temporarily staying. He walked everywhere because he had a seizure disorder, so he was temporarily staying. I was paying for an extended stay hotel for him to stay in town near where he was living so that he could still walk everywhere. And so each day I would transfer him money. He would contact me each day, and we had a great phone call Tuesday night, he was telling me about a room he looked at, and he thought as soon as the snow melted, he could move in. And the next morning, I didn't even realize that at first that he hadn't called me or texted me to transfer him money. And I had no power and heat and I was snowed in. So I wasn't even like thinking clearly at first. And then as the day went on, I realized that he hadn't contacted me. And I called, my daughter, my son, nobody no, we all couldn't reach him. And we called the hospital, we called the hotel, nothing. The next morning, I got a phone call early in the morning, and they identified themselves as the county police officer where my son was staying. And he said, "I'm so sorry to do this over the phone, but with the snowstorm and everything and you living so far out, I couldn't come out there, but your son was found dead." And that was the hardest thing that I've ever gone through in my entire life. And it probably felt like the world stopped. And I, it was also so hard to tell his brother and sister, because they were always so close.
Yeah.
That was just so hard. And the very early days, I barely slept. And I know my younger son, he didn't either, because many of the nights we were on the phone with each other. My daughter was able to sleep, but the two of us weren't. And I know we talked about early on, like just something stuck in my mind, like within a few weeks after losing him, that like Tony Robbins said, find somebody who's been through what you've gone through and see how they came out of it. And
Mm-hmm.
started ordering all these memoirs written of somebody who lost a child. And then I moved into somebody who just lost a loved one. And it gave me so much connection. I wasn't ready for like a support group at
Mm-hmm.
that point. People had given me a name, and I couldn't do it that early on. But reading the books in just my own home, and in my bed was like my safety place. Um and talking to my kids, seeing my kids like share, when we would get together, this is where I'm saying that cherishing the memories really comes in, is we would get together and we would start talking about our memories and experiences with Alex. And we would kind of, during that time together, we just get lost in those memories, and it
Mm-hmm.
it felt it felt better during that time. And you know I just you can't trade that. I mean, that's just something I am so grateful for. And maybe about a month and a half after I lost him, I was guided to open an email from Hay House. And normally I get so many different emails from so many different things and I don't open them. But something had me open this one, and it was about a free 4-day book writing workshop. And I have no idea why, but something made me sign up, even though I thought I'm not ready to listen to anything and absorb any information. But I listened to it, and by the end of the 4 days, I signed up for their 1 year book writing membership, and I knew that I was supposed to write a book, a memoir, to help other parents who have a child with mental illness and addiction, who
Wow.
are going and who have lost a child and who are going through that journey that I went through, that 9-year journey, and then losing him. And I um I did, around that same time, I just did a lot of like soul searching. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just this weird process. Like I never thought about these questions before, but like why am I here, and what is my purpose, and why am I still here and my son's not? And um what I what I really knew deep down is that my purpose is to help other parents on a similar journey. And so this kind of started with writing my memoir, and then with kind of shifting my coaching practice to starting to work with parents and then starting a Facebook group for parents. And I just became so passionate um about helping, and because I want parents to be able um to know that there is hope. You don't have to wait for your child to stop using drugs or be stable on their medicine to be able to connect with them and have a relationship with them, or to have peace in your life. And
Mm.
it doesn't mean you're going to have peace every single second. Like, there's still going to be like crises, like, when I almost lost my son a few times, but for the main part, you can still live your life.
Mm.
And so I knew that I could help them through that. And so it just became a real passion and purpose of mine. And that that helped me a lot. And so did writing my book. And writing my book connected me with my son. All of those sleepless nights that I had, all of the ideas for all of the chapters and all the experiences that I was going to share would just flow to me all night long. I would have to like stay up and take notes and everything. And it flowed to me in great detail, much, much better than I could just remember on my own. And even the outline, I remember Hay House saying, okay, you don't write anything till you have an outline. And I remember thinking my stuff's all over the place. How am I going to do this? All came to me one night, wrote it all down the next day. So my
It's
son was
almost like I was gonna say, it's almost like his energy was right there guiding you the entire
yes,
time.
all of that flowed from him. So he helped me write this book. So this book connected me so much. So I wrote it in 6 months, but then the editing and publishing process was like another 6 months, 6 or more months. And so this this time really helped to just connect me with him. And I remember, on the first, well, they're all kind of hard, but when it gets to be his birthday, when it gets to be the anniversary of his death, I mean, as people who have lost a loved one, that these are difficult dates. And
Right.
while I still had the book to work on, I would make sure I am working on it on those days, because it really helped me so much. And I I started, talking to him out loud, like every single night, well, sometimes even during the day, but always every night before bed.
Mm.
And the other thing that really helped me in my journey is a couple of times, I think 3 times now, I have virtually met with a medium. And so many things that she said, I know that my son was listening to me
Hmm.
when I was talking out loud to him. So this really confirmed, and my kids did the same. I paid for an appointment for them to meet with her as well.
Wow.
And it was the same thing. I think it really helped them to to really know that he is hearing them, and to help them with their relationship with him. So there are still like so many days that I just think like, oh gosh, Alex, I wish you were here physically, like here. Like, I know he's here.
Right.
He's always with me. He
His
really is.
energy definitely is not gone.
No, he's always, it's a different relationship. It's like, so it's like the love is always there, and I feel it. And I know he knows of the love that I have for him, and I really appreciate the relationship we have. And sometimes, like, I know even I've been on my way to like a book signing, and I will say, Alex, please help bring the people who need my book. And I would get people who were just not even in the area, who said they were passing through from another state, and they didn't know why they were stopping at this Barnes and Noble and coming in. They didn't even know I was there. And they would tell me the
Wow.
story of what they were going through and buy my book. And like, I got a bunch of these people. So it's really like he's always helping me. And I know the medium said that he felt that like when he was living, life was so difficult for him and he wasn't able to. He also, like me, liked to help others, but it was
Mm.
hard for him. And he
And
feels
now
like
his energy really gets to do
finally,
that.
yeah, so he feels like now he can finally do it. So I feel like it's he and I together, and that has helped me a lot. in the grieving process,
Hmm.
because grief is a process. I mean, everything that I've learned, and I'm in a grief certification program right now to get a certification to be able to help others through their grief.
Hmm.
And I know one thing is that I learned is the grief is directly related to the love that we have. And so, because the love is always there, the grief will always be there, but it doesn't mean that our pain has to still be there.
Right. One of the things I actually studied to be a doula, and one of the things that my doula had said to the class and really, really stuck with me was that there's a difference between pain and suffering. And that if you're going through something where you're in pain, it's different than feeling suffering from pain. And if
Yeah.
you can, the pain is always going to be there. That grief is always going to be somewhere within you because, like you said, the loss of somebody is huge. It's not something you just get over because your love for them was so great. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be a suffering, and it doesn't have to be this constant wallowing in like you said, you at the beginning you were in bed all the time and you couldn't sleep and you couldn't get up, and there was that whole dichotomy of like, now what? And I think that as you've moved out of the suffering idea of it, the pain will still be there, but you're really healing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's normal in the very beginning that you do have some suffering.
Oh,
When
100%.
When your suffering continues on, though, for a while, sometimes it can be about the stories that you tell, because what happens is that when we don't have all the answers, our mind just fills in the blanks.
Right.
And so, but that's a story.
Right.
And our story might result in some suffering. And, there's a lot of people that feel guilt. There's just a number of emotions that come up, and sometimes they are from the stories that we fill in.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of uncovering those. And but like you said, the grief, we're gonna have the grief. We're gonna be living with the grief.
Right. And just because you've moved out of the suffering part of it doesn't lessen your relationship with the person. It doesn't mean that you love them any less. In fact, I feel like it almost means you can appreciate the love that you had for them more because they would still want you to live. You're still here. And there's no reason that you can't continue living your life.
Yeah, I think you're supposed to continue living your life, because I mean, I know for me, there's a reason I'm still here, and
Hmm.
that's with my son, for us to help other parents. And
Right.
so there's a reason when you're still here and your loved one isn't. There is a reason. We do all have our soul has a purpose.
Right. And I think that it's hard to see in the moment. It's hard to understand. You can never answer the question of why is that person not here anymore? Why did I lose the baby? Why did I lose my child? Why did I lose my parent? Whatever it might be. But at the same time, like you said, you can find the reason why you're still here and you can still make purpose for not having them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you're always going to miss them. I mean, even though of course, I appreciate the, you know, the relationship I do have with him now, and I do feel like he's always with me. Like I said, there are times where I just feel like I'll start talking out loud and I'll be like, Alex, I just miss you so much being here physically
Right.
with me.
Right.
And there's always gonna, like, those special days are harder, like holiday, anybody who's lost a loved one, like the holidays are harder.
Yeah.
The Mother's Day, Father's Day, their birthday, your birthday,
Yeah.
anniversary. There's just so many things. Like, it helps to have a plan.
Yeah.
I mean, I know for me, on his birthday, I try to do things that would celebrate him and connect me to him. And sometimes I've even gotten together with, like, for me, sometimes it helps to spend time with people who knew him really well. Of course, my children, but then sometimes there were other people. Like, I had a friend of mine, actually, I met her in Al-Anon, and her husband had a a rehab, a alcohol and drug treatment center, and my son had been there a number of times. And so my friend actually had met Alex a number of times because he was there. And
Hmm.
So she knew him well, and I remember she wanted to get together, and we got together actually. I spent a couple hours with her on his birthday. I also went to go visit some people, some care like counselors and that kind of thing in his life that were important to him, and I brought them signed copies of my book last year. So I tried to do like meaningful things.
Right,
I mean, the first year I was able to work on writing my book, but then the second year the book was already out. So,
right. It's
um,
so interesting to me because I feel like one of the things that people never know what to do with is do I bring the person up? Do I not bring the person up? Do I sort of ignore that they're gone or what do I do? And I know that at least from every single person I've spoken to, forgetting the person is harder than bringing them up. And so when you're ignoring them and you're ignoring the fact that they were here, the person in pain often then goes into that mode of suffering because they're like, it's almost like they didn't exist.
yeah, I know that's the thing is I know it's really hard for people out there to know what to say to you when you've lost somebody, and that can be really hard, but the best thing that they can do is to give them the space to talk and
Hmm.
to hear them and to listen, because this is the other thing that I've learned is one of the needs of people in grief is to have your pain witnessed and to be heard. So to
Right,
be able to talk about your loved one and have people that you care about listen, and
right. And then share
and
their own memories.
exactly. If they knew the person, then if they can share something, that's even more powerful. And if they
Mhm.
didn't know them, they can just listen. And I think sometimes people feel uncomfortable because they feel like they have to fix it, but you can't fix this. But what they just need is to be heard and understood, and their emotions valued, you know?
Right. I was just talking to somebody the other day about that people innately want to help, people innately want to try and fix, but there are certain times where all you need to do to fix is to just sit and listen and give the other person the space, like you said.
Yeah. So true. I mean, because they know there's no fixing it. The only fixing it is to bring their loved one back, and they know
Right.
that that isn't going to happen. So
No.
they're not looking to you to fix it.
Right. I'm not religious in terms of Christianity. I am religious with Judaism, and the only resurrection I've ever heard of is something I don't even believe in. So, unless that's going to happen with your loved one, they don't want to hear it.
Right. So they know, they know you can't fix it, and they're not looking for you to.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, you had said that you were, at least I thought you said you were a coach before your son had passed away. What were you coaching in before? And then I know you've shifted obviously more into now helping parents with their grief and with working with children who have addictions and who have issues that can't necessarily be resolved easily.
Yeah. So I used to coach women in their relationships with a partner and in their relationship with themselves, because many times it started with themselves. Usually their
Hmm.
problems in relationships was related to themselves, and so
Hmm.
that's why I started to describe it in that manner, that it was not just the relationship with others, but it was the relationship with themselves. So and that's still so important, like that's even important, like to work with parents, like their relationship with themselves. And
Right.
um, but yeah, that's what I was doing. I actually trained to become a coach because I loved helping other people, and that helped me a lot. Like when I was dealing with my son's mental illness and addiction, what I learned is what helped me a lot was to help others.
Hmm.
And so one of the things I did was training, and I've kind of training has been an ongoing practice. I'm one of these people
I
that
think
loves
it's
to learn.
always,
So
yeah.
I'm like always in trainings, and so so I think I'm almost never not, because I'm always learning, I'm always growing. I think that's one of my top needs is growth. But
That's awesome.
I think it's also contribution and helping others too. And so focusing on those has always helped me, because what I learned early on when Alex was, early on diagnosis with his illness and addiction is that when I wasn't focusing so much on the growth and the contribution, I was too focused on needing certainty. And there is no certainty that life is going to unfold for him the way I want it to, according to my own plan. In fact,
Right.
that's just not going to happen. And the more I focused on that certainty, the more fear I had in my life and less peace. And so it wasn't until I kind of shifted to really focus on helping others and doing things for others, and then growth and learning and just everything I learned, and like, okay, how can I apply this to me? Like, that's what I do. It's like, okay, everything I've learned, how I know I can use it to help others, but how can I help myself right now?
Right. One of the things that I found so helpful after I'd gone through the miscarriage was I I I had seen it somewhere and I put it into my workbook of the circle of things that you can control and the circle of things that you can't control, because there are so many things that are just way beyond our control. And for you, I'm sure it was just looking at your son and saying, for his entire life growing up, there was little things you could control as he was getting older, but there's got to be a point where you say you literally have no control over what happens anymore. And you have to look into your inner circle and say, okay, within my own processes, what do I have full control over? And if that's helping others and whatever that means to you, going to a food bank or coaching or just being there, then that's the way that you work it.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, and I remember, like, I for many years I went to Al-Anon, which is a support group for families who have a loved one with addiction. And so but I honestly got so much more out of volunteering and doing things for others. Like, I became a group representative and I led meetings, I volunteered at events, I sponsored others, and I got I that helped me more. And I think it's just the way I am, is that it just helps me to help others. But
Mm,
I really got a lot out of that. And it is a wonderful support group.
that's great. Um, since obviously not everybody is capable of writing a book after losing a person that they love, which I think is phenomenal that you did that and now you're sharing it with others and telling your story and how it can be so helpful. What are some other areas that you felt like were really helpful after you lost your son that kind of got you up and living again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think even if you're not writing a book, I don't underestimate the power of writing, even
Hmm.
journaling. Journaling about your loss actually can be helpful to get it out of out of your brain and onto the paper. And it can just be for you. It can
Hmm.
just be a journal. It can just be, or you can even write a letter to your loved one. I do that too. I write letters to him. Um, I think writing can be helpful in whatever form. I
And that way you
also,
don't have to worry about the grammar and the editing and the spelling. You could just do it for yourself.
oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think finding ways to connect with your loved one, or at least to their memory, doing things in their memory, doing things that connect, that feel connecting to you. I mean, I mentioned a few of the things that felt connecting for me, but it can be different for different people. And I do encourage people to speak out loud to their loved one,
Hmm.
and to look for signs. And I do think reading or connecting in some way with people who have gone through a similar loss, whether either you're going to read the books, or I did later join a grief group. But only recently actually I joined the grief group. So, only when you're ready.
Right.
So it just kind of depends. And spending time, I would say, not forcing yourself to do things that you're not ready to do. Like, I really never forced myself. I mean, I honestly, for a number of months, I did things from my bed. I wrote part of my book from my bed. I would say taking good care of yourself, really, because that's so important. That's what's going to carry you through, is because really there's not going to be anyone else who's going to be able to carry you through this loss. It's going to have to be you. So being able to take good care of yourself and doing things that are helpful to you, whatever that is.
Hmm.
And for me, it was not pushing myself to do more than I was ready. Um, and because I remembered like back then before I lost him, I loved cooking. And but for the longest time after I lost him, I just didn't want to be out of bed that long. Like I just
Right.
didn't want I would batch cook if I was up on a Sunday. I would be like, okay, I'm just gonna make stuff and then that way I don't have to get out of bed too often. I can just go grab it.
Throw it
Um
in the microwave and you're good.
yeah, honestly. But
I
I
think
think
it's so
also
important also not to interrupt you, but to add to that, that sometimes you have to make a list because you really should take a shower every day. You should really brush your teeth every day. You should really remember to eat 3 times a day. And if you can't, if you, like you said, you batch cooked on Sundays sometimes and said, you know what? I know I don't have the energy to cook every day, but if you got it done once that week and then you had meals already set, thank God you could check that off your list. But to be able to also, like, I remember at one point I got to 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and I was like, I really don't even know if I've brushed my teeth. I have no clue. But if I had that list that I then started that the next day, I was like, okay, I can physically check that off and say, I did it. And I'm still taking care of myself in the smallest ways possible.
that's such a good idea. It is because it is so important, like to just take care of yourself in the smallest way, like whatever you can do. Because
Right.
I really don't think you should force yourself. Because the thing is that your emotions that you're going through, the only way you're going to come out the other side is to go through them.
Hmm.
And I feel like sometimes when you push yourself too much, you might be like blocking out emotions and just pushing them. And if you're pushing them down, you're not working through them.
Right.
And so I just feel like in order to kind of come out the other side, remember, you're still going to be grieving, but hopefully with less pain and suffering
Right.
involved. But you have to work through that pain. You have to work through those emotions. And I just feel like you want to take care of yourself so that you can do that, and you don't want to push yourself so that you're not blocking them out.
Right.
And i I think the other thing that is really helpful is to find meaning and purpose in your life,
Hmm.
to really and everybody is different what that can be. And maybe it's a purpose for yourself that you have, like a passion, or maybe it is just a matter of finding meaning from your loved one's memory.
Hmm.
Maybe there is something, like I know I've met people that have lost like a parent to maybe a specific type of cancer, and so they found meaning out of volunteering for that organization or raising awareness for that organization. And like there's just so many examples. But finding meaning from the loss can be really powerful as
Hmm.
well.
I think it's also finding the meaning in the everyday. I know it's funny because I just had this conversation with my dad. This episode probably is airing in May, since we're already today's April 1st. And my dad and I always on April 1st for years, I mean, ever since I was probably 6 or 7 years old, I would always run to him as a kid. And the first thing I would say is, Dad, go check in the mirror. You've got something on your nose. And he would fall for it every year, or at least pretend to fall for it every year. And he would go look in the mirror and I'd be like, April Fools. And so now I haven't lived at home in, I don't know, 15, 20 years, but every single year I will call him on April Fool's Day. And today, when I called him, he said, I was waiting for your phone call. And so, even those little moments that, thank God he's still here, but I know that that day's going to come, that on April 1st, I'm going to do it to somebody else when he's not here because it'll be my way of keeping
Oh,
him
for
here.
sure. Well, that's I think that's also keeping his memory alive, and I think it's finding meaning also. I mean, it's so powerful. And it's just I think it's a way of celebrating him too, celebrating what you had, the relationship you had. I think that's important too, is in the grieving stage, getting through grief is, for me, the other thing helpful was spending time with people who knew my son, whether
Hmm.
that's my children or my parents, or like I said, there were other people that knew him for a variety of reasons, and I would feel a connection
Right.
just by being able to be with somebody who knew him well.
Right. And it's knowing him in a different way. I know a good friend of mine had lost her husband about 2 years ago, and she loves hearing from people that knew him in other aspects of life that will tell her different stories that she didn't know or she's never heard. And she's like, oh my gosh, tell me more. Like she could live in that space for hours.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing you can do is you can ask people that knew him in different capacities, can they share something, with you that, a story,
Right.
and that can be really, like, all these things are really, I feel like they're healthy ways of healing.
Hmm.
And it's a process. And I would say the other thing is just to be gentle with yourself and not feel like you should be here.
Right.
It's been X time, you should be here, because that's not correct. it's
Right.
it's not. And everybody's really different. And I think the other thing that can be hard when, for example, if you have a couple that are still together and they lose a child, people grieve in different ways. And so sometimes they might not understand that their partner is also grieving because it's totally different. Maybe
Right.
one person is in bed, not doing much at all, just not able to work, not able to do much. And the other person is like, in 2 weeks, they're back to their normal life.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they didn't love the person who passed. And it
Right.
doesn't mean that they're not still grieving. It's just there's just so many, everybody's unique.
Everybody handles it differently. I remember I had gone into a group therapy after the miscarriage, and there was the therapist who ran it. It was called Heal, and he was a survivor of a stillbirth. His wife had given birth at, I think it was 35 weeks to a stillbirth baby. And so he knew exactly what everybody in the group was going through. And he said exactly that, that his wife was the one who he was like literally picking up out of bed to put her in the shower for the funeral. He was literally dressing her, carrying her down the stairs almost, whereas he was the exact opposite. And he was like, I'm going to go paint the deck and I'm going to go build this and I'm going to go put this in the backyard and I'm going to have, and she's sitting there like, can you stop for a second? And he's sitting there saying, can you get up and help me? And they're both grieving in very different ways. And thank God they understood how to then talk to each other and come together.
Exactly. Yeah, that's so important, because you don't want, if you're married and you lose a child, you don't also want to lose each other
Right.
too.
Right.
You-
Right. And for your other kids too, I'm sure each of them had their own grief process, and to be able to understand where you were coming from and to see where they were coming from and to just have this complete understanding together to say, okay, we're each in our own space and we're here for what the other person needs, but also know that we need you for us. We need you. I need you for me.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we all did it differently. I mean, my kids were, well, they had to be, they were back to work very quickly because they
Wow.
didn't have the time off. They just didn't have another option. And for me, I was pretty much working for myself. So I kind of did have the option. So I
Right.
wasn't. So I admired them. I'm like, wow, I knew that was because they had to.
Right.
But I'm like, they're able to do it. But then they admired me, like, oh my God, how could, right after you wrote this book in 6 months? So,
Right.
we all are different. And it's just accepting that we're all different and we have a different way of grieving, and that's totally okay.
Yeah. And I think it just goes back to the point of once you can understand that your grief is acceptable and the things that you're feeling are okay and you can work through those, then it's not going to be like that forever. Yes,
Right.
their loss will always be with you, but the suffering is not going to be there forever.
Yeah, I think that's where it really helps to either listen to other people's stories, like we talked about. There's podcasts, there's your podcast where you can listen to other people's stories. You can read other people's memoirs. You can join a grief group. You can do a lot of things that make you understand that you're not always wherever you are right now. You're not always going to be right there.
Right. And I think going back to the connection piece of it, to know that you're not alone. I just released, and I'm so excited by this. I have a ring for different types of loss. It's a silicone ring. Um, and for miscarriage, pregnancy loss, and child loss, it's green. And then for different other types of losses, I chose different colors. So if you've lost a parent, it's purple. And if you've lost a spouse, it's gold. And if you've lost a sibling, it's red. And just by being able to look and see somebody else wearing the same color ring that you have, or even the same type of ring that you have, that you're like, I know exactly what that person has gone through. I can connect with you instantly without saying a word.
Yep, it's so true. That connection piece, it's when you're going through something like loss of a loved one, that connection is so needed and so powerful.
Yeah. And I think that's the goal of the grief group. But sometimes when it's time for the grief group, let's say it's 2 o'clock on a Wednesday, you're like, I'm not in that space at the moment. I don't want to be in that space. But if you're at the grocery store and all of a sudden somebody asks you an innocuous question and it hits you, and you're like, wow, now is really when I need to connect with somebody. My goal, hopefully, is that you'll find somebody wearing a ring and be like, oh my gosh, you've also lost somebody. Can I talk to you for 2 seconds? And then
Yeah,
you have that unspoken understanding.
that is so true. Yeah. The thing with the grief group is it's like sometimes you can take on other people's pain and that can be really hard. So you have to be careful to be able to empathize, but not take it in internally.
Yep. Yeah, putting up your own, I call it an energy shield. I like to picture it like The Incredibles, where Violet has that energy bubble around her. It's so important for your own well-being to not take on. And I think the same is true in terms of what you were talking about with your son when he was alive, that his pain and suffering was not for you to take on. You can be empathetic towards it and you can be sympathetic towards it, but it's not your pain.
No, and it doesn't help anybody else when you take on other people's pain either.
Right. Right. Is there any last piece of advice that you'd like to share that you felt really helped you in terms of your healing process and where you are now?
I would say the one thing that really helps me is just appreciating how precious life is
Hmm.
and that we never know how long we or others have, and just to really make the most and be present with what you have. And like for me, I mean, I did this with my son, and
Good
you
night.
know, treasured my time with him. And then I did this, even now I've got two other children that are here and I want to be there for them and treasure my time with them. And so just realizing the importance of and how precious our life is.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. As my son obviously interrupted, I was trying to say good night, and I will give him a hug in a second. But I, I, you don't know how much time we have, and I think to appreciate the time spent appreciating even to f- to be able to see you and the way that you speak about your relationship with your son now, even though he's not here physically, the energy is still here and it's very obvious. And I mean, I can see it when you talk about him that connection is still there. So to be able to appreciate even the times that you're talking to him as a one-sided conversation is important.
It's so important. I mean, I would honestly say maybe the one thing that helps me the most is right now is my connection with him. And so I think whatever people need to do to have that connection. I mean, it's been a process with me. It's been the realization that he was feeding me the information for my book and we were writing it together. Because sometimes when I read the stories in it now, I'm like, oh my God, how did I remember that? So knowing that he was with me, and then the confirmation from meeting with the medium, and so I think like whatever people need to do to be able to have relationship with, because that's honestly been really, really helpful for me.
Yeah, I can understand that. I also just want to put in a caveat to not constantly seek out the medium because you don't want to live in the past,
Right.
but that to appreciate when you do get that connection.
Yeah, I think what I guess I've done 2 times, and then the third time I gave it to my kids. So instead of me.
Oh,
Yeah.
were you
Because
able to be with them or you gave it to them on their
I
own?
didn't. I gave it to just them.
Okay.
But we did a call afterwards so they could tell me about it. And the funny thing is the few days leading up to their appointment with the medium, I kept saying to Alex, remember, please make sure you come through. David and Stephanie are gonna be please come through. And when my kids got on the call with me after, um, I said something to them that I had told him that, and my son was just blown away. He's like, she said that. So the medium said that. Yeah.
Wow.
So that solidified things for him to know that Alex was still there.
Right.
And so I think that it can be helpful. So I've done it twice. I think it was about like once a year. And it's like she had like a 2-year wait list, and but there was a
Wow.
cancellations Facebook group. And so how I used to check it all the time for cancellations, and I'd catch it like 20 minutes after she posted and it was too late, it was full. And
Wow.
so I stopped, and I think that Alex guided me to find it one time when she was posting right then, and
Yep, the right time in the
that's
right
how I got in.
place.
Right. And so I've always told him, if you need to talk to me and I'm not getting it,
Just get
yeah,
her.
yeah. So there was one other year that it would, like last year, it was the same thing. I was guided, and so I did that. And so this appointment that came up in January, it was one we scheduled at two, the 2-year mark. And
Wow.
so I thought, well, I just had a session last summer. I don't
Right.
really need one. And so I wanted my kids to be able to do it.
That's really cool. I love that also that he guided you to it, that he was like, okay, I'm ready to say something now, and I'm ready for you to hear, and we can have a conversation. And then he's like, okay, let's give it a little time.
Exactly. So, I mean, I was able to get the information from him for my book, but I think that sometimes other times, he had things to tell me and I wasn't getting them. I
Right.
wasn't, I'm not a medium. So,
No. I know that I'm tapping into some intuitions that I have, but I definitely am not a medium.
no.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I want to tell you how beautiful it is that you're able to look at the joy in life even through 9 years of watching your son suffer, but then knowing that he's still with you, knowing that his energy is still here, that he's guiding you and that he's guiding your other children. It's a beautiful thing to watch, and I really appreciate you sharing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me today on Pushing Through Loss. I hope this episode has provided support, understanding, and a sense of community. Remember, you are not alone on your journey, and you have the strength to face the challenges that come your way. If you found value in today's conversation, please leave me a review and consider sharing it with others who may benefit. Together, we can help each other heal and activate our inner strength warriors. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations, and until next time, you got this.